Life went on as normal for me at school until my birthday 2 months later in March. I remember that day very well. It was cold, icy weather, and we boys had to blow on our fingers and rub our hands to keep warm in the freezing classrooms. When a message came for me to go and see Mr. Creakle, I thought that Peggotty must have sent me a birthday present, and so I hurried gladly along to his room. But there, I realized something unusual had happened, because it was Mr. Creakle's wife who was waiting to speak to me. "David, my child," she said kindly, "we all have to accept that our loved ones can die at any moment." I looked at her, trying to understand what she meant. "I'm sorry to tell you that your mother is dangerously ill." There was a mist in front of my eyes, and suddenly burning tears ran down my face. I knew the truth. "Your mother is dead," she said. I was already sobbing loudly, and I felt I was an orphan, quite alone in the world. Mrs. Creakle packed my case herself and sent me home on the coach for the funeral. I did not realize at that time that I would never return to Salem House. When I arrived home, Peggotty met me at the door, and we cried miserably in each other's arms. Mr. Murdstone seemed very sad and didn't speak to me at all. Miss Murdstone, however, showed her usual firmness of character by checking that I had brought all my clothes back from school. After that, she showed no interest in me at all. There was a deathly stillness in the house. Peggotty took me up to the room where my dear mother's dead body lay, with my little brother who had died a few hours after her. Everything was fresh and clean in the room, but I could not look at my mother's lovely face, which would never smile at me again without crying. "How did it happen, Peggotty?" I asked, sobbing. "She was ill for a long time, Master David. She got worse after the baby was born, you see. She was sometimes unhappy and forgetful, but she was always the same to me, her old Peggotty. Those two downstairs spoke crossly to her and made her sad, but she still loved them, you know. She was so sweet and loving. I always sat beside her while she went to sleep. It made her feel better," she said. There was a short silence while Peggotty dried her eyes, then took both my hands in hers. "On the last night, she asked me for some water, and then gave me such a patient smile. She looked so beautiful. The sun was beginning to rise, and she put her head on my arm and died like an innocent child going to sleep." After my mother's funeral, I began to wonder what would happen to me. The Murdstones didn't even seem to notice that I was in the house. They had told Peggotty to leave, as they didn't want her as their servant anymore. So Peggotty was going to her brother's in Yarmouth until she decided what work to do next. She suggested taking me with her for a holiday, and to my surprise the Murdstones agreed. So, next morning, Mr. Barkis appeared at the door with his cart, and Peggotty's cases were put on it. We climbed up and sat beside him. Peggotty was naturally a little sad to leave her old home where she had been so happy with my mother and me, and at first she cried a little. But when Mr. Barkis saw her drying her tears and looking more cheerful, he too began to look happier, and he whispered to me, "Barkis is willing. You told her?" Aloud he said to Peggotty, "Are you comfortable?" Peggotty laughed and said that she was. And are you comfortable, Mr. David? He asked. I said that I was. Mr. Barkis was so pleased with this conversation that he repeated it many times during the journey, and Peggotty and I both had to keep giving him the same answer. When we arrived in Yarmouth and got down from the cart, we said goodbye to Mr. Barkis. Daniel and Ham Peggotty were waiting for us. Daniel and Ham were exactly the same as I remembered them, cheerful and generous as ever. But little Emily seemed different somehow. She was taller and prettier, but she didn't want to play with me or spend her time with me. I was rather disappointed, because I still considered she was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen, and I thought I was in love with her. Daniel and Ham were very proud of her intelligence and beauty, and just smiled when she laughingly refused to sit next to me. But they all listened with interest to my stories of school life at Salem House. I told them about the other boys, especially the handsome, clever Steerforth. I admired him so much that I could not stop myself telling them all about him. Suddenly, I noticed that Emily was listening eagerly, her blue eyes shining and a smile on her lips. She blushed when she saw that we were all looking at her, and hid her face behind her hands. Emily's like me, said Peggotty kindly, and would like to see David's friend, Mr. Steerforth. The days passed happily, although Emily and I didn't play together as we had done before. Mr. Barkis was a frequent visitor, and soon Peggotty explained to me that she had decided to marry him. I love you just as much, David, my dear, when I am married, she told me, holding me close to her. And I'll be able to come and see you in the cart any time I like. Barkis is a good man, and I'm sure I'll be happy with him. He has got a nice little house, and I'll keep a little bedroom there for you to use whenever you want. You'll always be welcome to come and stay.